Hey, this is Bribery, and this is the DFAM by Moog, or Moog, however you want to pronounce it. People love to argue about it. Over here is the DFAM Thing by a manufacturer or developer called Serendipity Synthesizers here in Australia. And this is a really interesting device for DFAM owners because those of you that have a DFAM, you already know it has a critical omission that is part of its fundamental design, and many consider it a mistake, which is it has this very interesting but quite bare bones 8-step sequencer that does not have an ability to reset. There is no reset button, there is no reset input, there is no MIDI, so you can't synchronize it with MIDI. You can only synchronize via CV clock over here in the patch bay, but again, there is no ability to reset the sequencer natively, which is really annoying if you want to set this device up with others. If you want to have certain steps play a role within this, which if you don't know the DFAM, it's a percussion synthesizer. So you might want the first step of the sequencer, for example, to be a kick drum, and then another step to be a snare. But if you want to integrate it with other equipment, like I've got my Synthstrom Deluge up here, which is a sequencer, if I want to synchronize them, it's a bit of a pain because I've got to, whenever I stop the sequencer here, as you'll see, it's stopped on number 4 here, step 4. And if I hit play on my sequencer again, it's going to start from step 1 on the sequencer, but the DFAM will start from step 4. So if I had a kick drum aligned at step 1, it would no longer play on the downbeat. It would be starting at this weird kind of out of place in the sequencer, which is really frustrating. It's probably the number one thing that people gripe about with the DFAM, besides going, hey, this thing's kind of weird and sounds real scrunchy. But aside from that, working with other pieces of equipment is a giant pain. In comes the DFAM Thing. Now, this device does a whole bunch of stuff, but already, with those very simple problems, it doesn't have MIDI, it doesn't have the ability to reset. The DFAM Thing covers this, has MIDI DIN in the side, and that MIDI DIN is attached to the outputs of my Deluge here, which means when I hit play, which you'll only hear the sound at the moment from the Deluge, which is an extremely simple 808 pattern that I made this simple on purpose. Very simple. Now that is hooked up via DIN here, and when I hit play, you'll see it begins to run, and you'll see something very interesting, and DFAM users will probably immediately salivate at the mouth. You'll see that it's on step 2 at the moment. Now if this was set up regularly by just using CV clock into the patch bay here, if I hit play on the Deluge, it would play from step 1 here on the sequencer, but it would play from step 2 on the DFAM because this does not have a reset. But check this out. You'll hear what happens when I hit play up here, and have a look what happens to the DFAM. Ooh, mama. Let's purposely stop it at a weird spot, and I'll restart the sequencer again. And would you look at that? Just like magic, we have synchronization and reset thanks to the clever programming of the DFAM Thing. Now that already is probably worth the price of admission for so many DFAM users because, again, this is an almost fatal flaw of this device, not having a reset. It's a very strange omission to have, but it is what it is. So luckily, some devices are coming in handy to help us kind of combat that. Now, that's not the only thing this DFAM Thing has on board. First of all, this is only the MIDI mode that I'm using. It also has the ability to clock externally via CV and reset via CV as well. So again, it has the ability to reset, which the DFAM natively does not. It also has its own internal sequencer, or rather internal clock, so that when I set that to internal, hit play, it will play on the DFAM. Now, you're not hearing the DFAM at the moment because I haven't turned it up, but let's have a listen to it in MIDI mode. We know what the Deluge sounds like. We know that it's synchronized. Let's bring up a little bit of the scrunch, a little bit of the volume here on the DFAM. There it is. And reset. And reset. I'll turn the tempo up. Tempo down. Stop it, reset it. And again, that probably has already gotten most DFAM users opening up the link to the manufacturer and wanting to buy one immediately, because that is so huge. Closing that gap in the original device and giving it that reset and giving it that synchronization ability is really, really massive. But that's not all that this thing does. By the way, this thing is still in development, so there are still features being tweaked and added to it. And the very obvious thing is it's got these two knobbies on here. One of them is also a push button, and this allows us to select different sequencing modes. At the moment, it is in normal mode. You can't really see on my camera, but this is a really nice, bright blue LCD screen, which is really nice and crisp. It's in normal mode at the moment. I'm going to put it in reverse mode and engage it, and it's going to do exactly what you think it does when I hit play. DFAM in reverse. Let's go back to normal mode. And still synchronized. This also has an align step 1 function, which I did before I started this video. DFAM users would know that the only way to synchronize this device is to switch off the sequencer, page through until you get to step 1, if that's what you want to start on, get it ready, and then hit play on your sequencer. This DFAM thing remembers the position that it's at via MIDI clock, at least I think that's how it does it, and it requires you to create that initial step 1 point to begin with just by going to this thing that says align step 1, click it, and now... So if you find it gets wonky and out of time when you use some of the additional crazy modes, which I'll show you in a second, you can very easily realign it. You can realign it on the fly as well, which is pretty cool because you can't do that with the DFAM itself. You can't advance through steps without stopping the sequencer, which again is super annoying. So already there's so many components of just these basic functions that fill this giant hole that the DFAM is left with. So it has reverse mode, as I showed a second ago. It has bounce mode. Check this out. It has an odd and even mode, which will jump between the odd and even steps here, like this. Which is pretty cool, because it gives you an instant different flavor on the sequencer while still keeping it in time. It also has a shuffle mode, which has its own flavor of that. Which has some kind of set pattern, which I haven't bothered to sit down and work out. It also, of course, has a random mode. Everyone loves a bit of random. Yep, it's just popping around however it wants. It also has a custom mode, so you can set custom. I haven't actually used this yet, where you can use these keys to key in your own custom pattern, and it will play it back. I'll be honest, I haven't even tried that yet. It also has this really cool function called play as keys, and when I engage this mode, you might have noticed this has 8 little push buttons here. There are 8 steps of the sequencer. You're probably taking a good guess about what play as keys mode does. Now, it's not exactly an MPC for finger drumming kind of vibes, but, you know, already it has an interesting kind of ability to even just re-triggering stuff, which Again, you can do it here on the DFAM, but you'd have to switch off the sequencer and have to use the advance function to page across to the step that you want to play and hit the trigger button. So this is kind of like 8 trigger buttons aligned with the 8 steps of the step sequencer, which is way handier. Now, how useful it's going to be, well, that's, I guess, really up to you. But it's a cool thing to have. You can save the custom pattern that you created as well. I'm not sure if it has a memory bank. I think it probably is just the one. I'm not really sure. It also has a MIDI mode. Now I'm going to go up to my deluge here, and I've got a blank MIDI sequence, MIDI track rather here, which if I just go into the keyboard mode up here, these green and kind of these are representing octaves if you've ever seen an isomorphic keyboard before. And these 8 steps that we just played with the keys, which is a bit gammy, these actually can be tracked via MIDI using all of the regular MIDI notes that aren't accidental. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but not the accidentals in between will trigger notes like this. I'll play a C, and we're on step 1, a D, whoops, yep, wherever D is. And all of these will I couldn't, it was actually playing it with D, but that trigger's not turned up. That's why I was doing it. There we go. So it will play. So you can actually sequence the DFAM using a MIDI sequence, which I could do if I really wanted to. I could do that. There's a snare sound. Yeah, let's do that. Of course, the DFAM is monophonic, so you're not going to get more than a monophonic sound out of it. But let's just switch off the drums that were in there and... which just by itself is kind of novel and cool. Which is really awesome. Go back over here. Let's go back to normal mode instead. I'm gonna make it more obvious. Bring my drums back here. And again, we are perfectly synchronized, which is really, really cool. Now, one thing that I'm sure at least some of you might be thinking is that the DFAM has a very interesting thing with its built-in sequencer, and that's that the sequencer goes really, 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 really fast. If I unplug this advanced clock here, which is coming from the DFAM, that's how it's hooked up. If I speed it up, it gets really, 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 really fast. I think it gets somewhere around the 20,000 BPM, which, yeah, I know what you're thinking. How useful is that going to be? Well, it depends on how wild you want to get with it. Now, that shouldn't be too much of a problem because if you are sequencing using an external sequencer, most external sequencers can't go that fast at all. 20,000 is... like, you can't go that fast. The modern MPCs, I've got one just off to the side here, they only go to 999. The Electrons go to somewhere around 300 BPM. In fact, the only sequencer that I know that can go 1,000 or beyond is our old mate here, the Deluge. It can go above 10,000. In fact, I don't know how fast it goes because it's only got a 4-character screen up here, little segment screen. And once it goes to about 9,800, if you go beyond that, it just says fast, which is pretty funny. And once it goes past fast, which would be 10,000, it still goes up a little bit further again. I'll turn off the volume of the DFAM so you can hear this, as ridiculous as it sounds. Yeah, again, that's probably not going to be useful for most people unless you're making, I think it's called tone core, which is when, it's supposed to get tonal because it's how fast. But if you did want to go wild with it, first of all, the DFAM Thing actually reads out what BPM it is. This is set to BPM 100. You won't be able to see the screen on my camera here because it doesn't quite pick up the LCD very well, but it actually reads the MIDI clock and it displays it here, and it displays it in real time. It also has a flashing clock light here above the internal tempo mode, or knob rather, and it can actually read clock up to 1300 BPM, which again is faster than the new MPC. It's vastly quicker, almost 4 times faster than the Electron machines as well, which are often considered the GOAT of sequencers. I disagree. Look at some of my previous videos. This is really the king of sequencing. But the point is, this can actually hold it together pretty well. Let's turn up the volume of the DFAM again so we can hear it. Hit play. It's at 100 BPM. Let's speed it up. All right. So you'll hear the DFAM sequencer will stop there. The deluge will keep speeding up, and the display here is reading, I think when I hit stop, sometimes it kind of is trying to catch it on the fly. The fastest I've seen it go, it went to 1401. So it can hold it together pretty well. It can't get up to 20k like this can, but if you wanted to go that fast, you could literally just yoink this out and use the internal tempo if you wanted. Or the other thing that it does, and I haven't talked about these modes yet because it's pretty much exactly the same as the MIDI mode, it has an internal clock as well. And if I switch it to that, it can actually go up to almost 20k. I'm going to hit run, which is like hitting the play button. And check this out. Keep going. Stop. Oh, geez. And it reads as 20,000 as its final output. I'm not sure how 100% accurate it is, but it's a computer and I'm not, so I'm guessing that it's right. I can't hear 20,000. I definitely can't click along. I can't do that at 20,000 BPM. But that's pretty cool because it means that if you were clocking with MIDI and for some reason you wanted to go buck wild with it, you could just flick this switch like this. Let's bring this back to 100 BPM. Whoops, like this. And if you wanted to go wild with it, why not? Yes, I'm sure your neighbors will love you for that. Now, the other thing that it's got in here is it's got some added functionality over here. It's not just those different modes that I mentioned before, but these 8 push buttons here aren't just for kind of doing some bad finger drumming and triggering the individual steps. They actually become extra devices. The first thing that they do in their default state, just by pressing them, they can shorten the length of the step sequencer. So by default, they're set to 8, and you'll actually see this displayed up here. And you can shorten the sequencer. So I might make this 4 steps instead of 8. Check this out. Look at that. How about 2? Oh, these triggers aren't turned up. How about 1? How about 8? How about 6? Why not? Now, you might have noticed that it's starting on step 2, probably because I was going a bit buck wild with the internal sequencer at 20,000 BPM. So if I wanted to realign it, it's very easy. I'm just going to go back to step 1, trigger the sequencer so it's ready to go, and go over here to the thing that says align step 1, wherever it is. Align. Where are you? Align step 1. Click, and now we should. There we go. Oh yeah, got 6 steps. Make it 4, 1, 8, which is pretty cool. And it still remembers that step 1 is my first step, which is pretty cool. On top of that, it's not just for shortening the sequence length. If you hold down the button that is part of this potentiometer, it becomes like a shift function. And these 8 steps become a clock divider or clock multiplier. Steps 1, or rather switches buttons 1 and 5, bring the clock back to its regular division, which I'm not sure what it is. It's aligned. Whatever that means. That's what it is. So steps 2, 3, and 4 are all multiplications of 2, 3, and 4. So double clock speed, triple clock speed, quadruple clock speed. Geez, bribes. And over here, you'll then be able to reset it on step 5, and then you'll be able to go half time, third time, quarter time. I'm pretty sure. So we'll see this. Hold down and go double time. Check this out. Triple time. You can do this on the fly. Quadruple. And back to regular. Would you look at that? Happy days. And then, of course, you could divide it. So let's go back to regular tempo and halve it. And third it. Of course, you're not going to hear all the steps because not all the triggers are turned up. But let's turn them up. Let's go back to regular time. And double it. So yeah, there's a pretty incredible amount of functionality built into this tiny little device. Its form factor at the moment is kind of this, on stilts kind of board kind of vibe. I'm not sure if there will be a different version that goes into production. I'm not sure what the plans are. That's obviously up to the developer. But even as it is, this is taken the DFAM for me, which I already really liked as just a vibe machine. Like it feels like a really broken alien robot cybernetic organism. Oh, best accent. You nailed it. It already is this amazing machine, but it just doesn't play well with others, and that's been my main gripe with it. Is it's so cool and so fun, but if I want to integrate it into the bigger setup, it is painful to do so. This little device fixes all of that for me, and of course there's still some quirks with it, and that's based on the fact that this is a very basic analog sequencer, and you're kind of always shackled to it, but that can also be kind of creatively liberating as well. So just with the DFAM Thing by Serendipity has really allowed me to connect this with my other devices, and they finally play well together. So anyway, keep an eye on the description below. I'll update it with links from the developer as they update things, or if they put them up for sale or whatever it happens to be, once it kind of moves out of, I guess, this kind of beta phase that we're in. But I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any questions or comments, let me know below. You know how to support the channel. Don't make me say it.